I woke up wearing the shirt of the one alpha my brother trusted more than anyone in the world. And the worst part was not the storm outside or the broken glass near the window. It was the quiet, unmistakable truth that Caleb Hayes had been with me through the night. For a few seconds, I did not move. I only listened. Rain still tapped against the roof in soft, exhausted rhythms, the kind that came after a violent summer storm had spent all its anger and left the world damp, gray, and ashamed. The power was still out. The digital clock on my nightstand was dead. The hallway was dark except for a thin strip of morning light leaking under the curtains, pale and cold like the sky had forgotten how to turn blue. I was curled on the living room couch beneath a heavy blanket that smelled like cedarwood, clean rain, and the faint bite of winter air. Caleb's scent. My fingers tightened around the fabric before my mind fully understood what my body already knew. This was not my sweatshirt. This was his shirt, soft from wear, too large on my shoulders, the sleeves hanging past my wrists. I sat up too quickly, and the room tilted. A dull ache pulsed behind my eyes. Not pain exactly, but the strange hollow feeling that came after too much fear, too many unsaid words, and a night I could only remember in broken pieces. Thunder shaking the windows. My knees giving out on the bathroom floor. Caleb's voice low and steady through the door, telling me to breathe. My own voice whispering that he had to leave before Ryan came home. Then his answer, rougher than I had ever heard it. Don't ask me to leave you like this. Heat climbed into my face, sharp and humiliating. Even though nothing in the room suggested anything had happened beyond care, restraint, and a line neither of us had fully crossed. Caleb had slept in the armchair across from me, I realized. The blanket folded on the floor, the untouched glass of water, the emergency lantern turned sideways on the coffee table, all of it carried the evidence of a man who had stayed awake to make sure I survived the night. My brother's best friend. Ryan's person. The alpha who had taught me how to change a tire when I was 16, who came to every Miller family barbecue, who called my mom ma'am and remembered exactly how my dad liked his coffee. Caleb was not supposed to smell like safety. He was not supposed to be the name my heart reached for when the dark closed in. I lifted my hand to push my hair away from my face, and that was when I saw it. Just below the inside of my wrist, where my pulse beat too fast, a faint silver mark curved across my skin like a crescent of mist. Not a bruise, not a scratch, a temporary scent bond, delicate but unmistakable, the kind that only appeared when an Omega's body accepted an Alpha as shelter during a crisis. My breath caught so hard it hurt. Across the room, the front door opened softly. Caleb stepped in from the porch with rain in his dark hair and guilt in his eyes, and before he could speak, I hid my wrist beneath his oversized sleeve because I knew one thing with terrifying clarity. Last night had changed everything. 12 hours earlier, I had been standing in my mother's kitchen pretending that my hands were steady. The rain had only just begun then, a soft tapping against the windows above the sink, nothing like the wild thing it would become by midnight. The house smelled like roasted chicken, garlic bread, fresh laundry, and the expensive cedarwood cologne Caleb Hayes always wore when he came straight from work. He arrived at 6:27, carrying a paper bag from the bakery on West Elm Street, because he remembered I liked lemon bars even though I had not mentioned them in 3 years. That was the worst thing about Caleb. He remembered small things. He noticed quiet things. He could make a person feel seen without ever saying anything dangerous enough to expose himself. Ryan opened the door before I could, grinning like he was 17 again instead of 28 and wearing a Navy suit for a flight to Denver that would leave in 2 hours. "You are late," Ryan said, pulling Caleb into one of those rough half-hugs men use when they are too proud to admit they missed each other. Caleb smiled, and the whole room changed. He was tall, broad-shouldered, rain-dark hair brushed back from his forehead, gray eyes calm in a way that always made my thoughts trip over themselves. "Traffic on Route 9 was terrible," he said. "Besides, I brought dessert. That earns me forgiveness." Ryan laughed and took the bag, but Caleb's gaze moved past him and found me near the counter. "Hey, Ethan." Just my name. 2 syllables. Nothing more. Still, my pulse made the foolish decision to answer like it had been called home. "Hey," I said, turning back to the salad before anyone could see my face. I was 23 years old enough to have my own apartment, old enough to pay my bills, old enough to know better than to love my brother's best friend. But knowledge did not stop the body from recognizing warmth. It did not stop the omega part of me from going still whenever Caleb entered a room, like every nerve had lifted its head to listen. Dinner was painfully ordinary. Ryan talked about his trip. Mom asked Caleb if he was eating enough. Dad complained about the storm warnings, interrupting the baseball broadcast, and I sat between normal laughter and a secret so heavy it felt like another person at the table. Caleb passed me the mashed potatoes before I asked. He moved my water glass away from the edge when my sleeve nearly knocked it over. Once, when Ryan made a joke about how Caleb had practically helped raise me, everyone laughed. Everyone except me. Caleb's hand paused around his fork for half a second, so fast no one else noticed. But I did. I noticed everything about him. Ryan leaned back in his chair and pointed at us with his napkin. Seriously, Ethan, you should be grateful. Caleb survived teaching you to parallel park. That is loyalty. I was not that bad, I said. Caleb looked at me over the rim of his glass, his expression unreadable. You hit one trash can. It was windy. It was July. Ryan laughed again, loud and easy, and I forced myself to smile because that was the shape my life had taken around Caleb. Smile. Look away. Breathe through it. Pretend his scent did not make the room feel smaller. Pretend his voice did not settle something anxious inside me. Pretend that when he said my name, I did not hear all the things he would never be allowed to say. Ryan left at 7:43 with a duffel bag over one shoulder and his phone pressed between his ear and his cheek, already arguing with someone from the airport before he reached the front porch. Mom hugged him like he was leaving for a year instead of one business trip. Dad reminded him to check the tire pressure, and Caleb stood beside the hallway table with his hands in his pockets, quiet in that watchful way of his. I stayed near the kitchen doorway, telling myself that once Ryan was gone, Caleb would leave too, and the house would become normal again. Safe again. Empty again. Ryan turned back at the last second, rain blowing across the porch behind him in silver sheets. Keep an eye on him for me, Caleb, he called, nodding toward me with that careless older brother grin that made my stomach twist. He acts independent, but he still forgets to lock the side door. I rolled my eyes because that was what Ethan Miller was supposed to do. Caleb only looked at me for half a heartbeat before answering. I will make sure he is all right. The words were simple. They should not have followed me like a hand between my shoulder blades. After Ryan drove away, Mom and Dad left for their weekend at my aunt's house before the storm warning turned serious, and suddenly the old lake house felt too large around me. Caleb was supposed to pick up the project folders Ryan had left in the den and then disappear back into his own life, the life where I was just his best friend's younger brother. But when a sharp gust rattled the living room windows hard enough to make the frames groan, he frowned and moved toward the glass. This latch is loose, he said. It has been loose for months, I answered, trying to sound casual. Ryan said he would fix it. Caleb gave me a look. Ryan also said he would learn how to cook anything besides scrambled eggs. Against my will, I smiled. He noticed, and something softer crossed his face before he turned away. He found Dad's toolbox in the mudroom and stood on a chair near the big front window, tightening the old brass latch while rain hammered the roof harder and harder. I held the flashlight because the overhead lights had begun to flicker. That was all. A normal task. Two people in a familiar house, doing something practical while a storm rolled in from the west. But the beam from the flashlight kept catching on the line of his jaw, the curve of his wrist, the damp ends of his dark hair brushing his collar. His scent mixed with the smell of rain through the cracked window, cedarwood and cold air, steady and clean. My fingers tightened around the flashlight until my knuckles ached. Then the lights went out. The whole house dropped into darkness so complete that the storm seemed to leap closer, pressing its wet hands against every wall. I gasped before I could stop myself. Caleb stepped down from the chair. Ethan, I am fine, I said too fast. A second later, thunder cracked over the lake, loud enough to shake the floorboards. The flashlight slipped from my hand and rolled under the coffee table, its beams spinning wildly across the ceiling. Caleb moved toward me, but stopped several feet away. Careful, always careful. Breathe, he said softly. It is just the storm. My phone buzzed at that exact moment with an emergency alert. Flash flood warning. Route 9 closed. Lake bridge blocked by a fallen tree. Shelter in place until further notice. Caleb read the message over my shoulder, his face lit pale by the screen. For one suspended second, neither of us spoke. Outside, the The wind shoved rain against the windows like gravel. Inside, the house had become a locked box, and the only alpha in it was the one person I was never supposed to want. For the first 20 minutes, we pretended the situation was only inconvenient. Caleb found the emergency lantern in the hall closet, checked the fuse box with his phone flashlight, and called the power company, though the signal kept cutting in and out until the call failed completely. I moved through the kitchen with the stiff calm of someone trying very hard not to be looked at. I filled a pitcher with water. I set candles on the counter. I listened to the rain hit the roof, so loudly it sounded like the entire lake had risen into the sky and was falling back down on us. Caleb kept his distance, and somehow that made everything worse. He stood near the mudroom, 6 feet away from me, his sleeves rolled to his elbows, his face unreadable in the lantern glow. "The bridge is closed," he said. "The county alert says no one should be on the road until morning." "Then you should stay in Ryan's room," I answered, too quickly. "It is upstairs. You know where it is." "Ethan." My name in his voice was a warning and a question at the same time. I turned away before he could hear the small break in my breathing. Something was wrong. It had started as warmth under my skin, faint enough to blame on panic, then became a slow, dizzy pressure in my chest, like my body had begun speaking a language I refused to translate. I opened the refrigerator for more water, desperate for cold air, and froze. The little digital thermometer I kept beside my medication case was dark. The ice tray had softened into slush. The backup suppressants I had picked up from the pharmacy that morning were sitting in the door, uselessly warm after hours without power. For one long second, I stared at them as if staring could undo it. Then the truth landed so hard my knees almost bent. "No," I whispered. Caleb was at my side before I heard him move, but he stopped himself at the edge of the kitchen island. His eyes dropped to the orange prescription bottle in my hand, then lifted to my face. The storm flashed white across the windows, and in that sharp burst of light, I saw him understand. Not all of it. "Enough. Are they compromised?" he asked gently. I hated that he knew to ask gently. I hated that my throat closed before I could lie. "They have to stay below 46 degrees. My voice sounded thin, unfamiliar. "The power has been out too long." Caleb's jaw tightened, but his tone stayed calm. "Do you have another dose anywhere?" I shook my head. The room was too warm. The candle smoke was too sweet. His scent was everywhere now, not because he was trying, but because I could no longer keep myself from noticing it. Cedarwood after rain. Cold air. Clean wool. The steady alpha presence I had spent years pretending did not make me feel safe. Caleb took one slow step back, putting more space between us, and the careful kindness of it cut deeper than panic. "I am going to open a few windows where the rain is not coming in," he said. "Fresh air will help. I will also check the medicine cabinet for fever reducers and electrolyte packets." "Stop," I said, the word breaking out of me before I could swallow it. He went still. I gripped the edge of the counter, my shame turning sharp. "Do not talk to me like I am a problem to manage." His eyes softened, and that made it worse. "That is not what I am doing." "Yes, it is." The storm roared over the house, but my voice rose above it, trembling and raw. "You are standing all the way over there because you are afraid of me, or disgusted, or maybe you finally remembered I am not just Ryan's little brother anymore." Caleb's face changed then, not with anger, but with something he had been holding down for far too long. The lantern flickered between us. He looked like a man standing at the edge of a truth that could ruin everything. "That is not why I look away," he said. For a moment, the storm was the only thing brave enough to speak. Rain clawed softly at the kitchen windows, thunder rolled somewhere beyond the lake, and the lantern between us painted Caleb's face in gold and shadow. He looked older than 29 in that light, not because of age, but because of the weight he carried behind his eyes. I had seen Caleb tired before. I had seen him serious, amused, protective, silent. I had never seen him afraid of his own honesty. "Then why?" I asked, though my voice barely sounded like mine. "Why do you always look away?" Caleb exhaled slowly, like the answer had been locked inside his chest for years and had grown teeth there. "Because if I look too long, I forget who I am supposed to be." The words landed so quietly that I almost wished he had shouted. Shouting would have been easier to dismiss. Shouting could have been blamed on the storm, the darkness, the pressure of being trapped in the same house. But this was worse. This was Caleb stripped down to truth. I stared at him across the kitchen island, my hands still gripping the counter, the useless medicine bottle lying between us like proof that my body had betrayed every careful wall I had built. What does that mean? I whispered. Caleb glanced toward the hallway, toward the framed photos of our families on the wall. Ryan and Caleb at college graduation. Ryan and Caleb fishing at Lake Travis. Ryan and Caleb standing in our backyard last 4th of July, sunburned and laughing, looking less like friends and more like brothers life had chosen by hand. When he looked back at me, his expression was controlled, but his voice had gone rough around the edges. It means I made a promise to Ryan a long time ago. My stomach tightened. What promise? To look out for you. A bitter laugh slipped out of me before I could stop it. That is what this is? You avoid me because of some brotherly promise? No, the answer came too fast. Caleb stepped closer, then stopped himself again, his restraint visible in every line of his body. I avoid you because the promise became impossible. The room seemed to shrink around those words. The candle flames trembled. Outside, a branch scraped along the siding with a long, mournful sound. I should have asked him to stop. I should have walked away while there was still enough distance to pretend we had not reached the edge of something irreversible. Instead, I said, "Tell me." Caleb closed his eyes for 1 second. When he opened them, the calm was gone, and what remained was devastatingly human. 2 years ago, at Ryan's birthday party, you fell asleep on the back porch. My breath caught. I remembered that night in fragments. Warm July air, too much lemonade, music from the speakers, Caleb's jacket suddenly around my shoulders after the temperature dropped. You were exhausted, he continued. Everyone else was inside. I came out to make sure you were not cold, and then your scent shifted. Heat rushed to my face, but he did not let the words become anything unsafe or ugly. His voice stayed careful, reverent even, as if the memory frightened him because it mattered. It was only for a second. Rain on white flowers. Honey over warm cotton. I knew before I wanted to know. I could not move. Knew what? Caleb looked at my wrist, though the sleeve still hid the faint silver mark that would not exist until the morning after. That. My alpha recognized you. The house fell silent in a way that had nothing to do with the power outage. My heart was beating so hard I felt it in my throat. For years, I had lived inside the ache of wanting someone who looked through me because he was honorable, distant, untouchable. Now the floor beneath that belief cracked open. He had not been looking through me. He had been looking away to survive. Why did you never say anything? I asked. His mouth tightened with pain. Because Ryan trusted me. Because you were younger. Because I thought silence was the cleanest way to protect everyone. I swallowed, but the hurt still rose. You decided for me. Caleb's face flinched as if the truth had found its mark. Yes, he said softly, and I have regretted it every day since. His regret did not make the room easier to breathe in. If anything, it made the air heavier, because regret meant choice, and choice meant Caleb had stood beside me at birthday dinners, lake weekends, Christmas mornings, and summer cookouts while carrying a truth that could have changed my life. I pressed one hand to my chest as another wave of dizziness moved through me, slow and warm and frightening, like my own body was a tide pulling away from shore. Caleb saw it immediately. Of course he did. He had always noticed the things I tried to hide. Sit down, he said, but there was no command in it, only concern. Please. I wanted to refuse because pride was easier than needing him, but my knees disagreed. I reached for the counter and missed. Caleb moved without thinking, then stopped just before touching me, his hand suspended in the narrow space between us. That hesitation hurt more than any touch could have. You can help me, I whispered. I know, he said, voice low. That is why I have to be careful. I hated how steady he sounded. I hated how much I trusted it. He pulled out a chair with his foot and waited until I lowered myself into it. Then he went to the far cabinet, found a clean towel, soaked it with cool water from the sink, and set it on the table within my reach instead of pressing it to my skin. Every movement was deliberate. Every inch of distance was a promise he was forcing himself to keep. Drink, he said softly, placing a glass beside the towel. Small sips. I obeyed because the room had begun to blur at the edges. The storm wrapped the house in sound, but Caleb moved through it like an anchor, opening the kitchen window 2 inches where the roof overhang kept the rain out, lighting another candle when the first began to drown in melted wax, checking the hallway closet for the battery fan Dad kept for camping trips. He found it behind a stack of old beach towels and set it on the table, the little blades humming weakly as cool air brushed my face. "You are handling this like an emergency drill," I said, trying to make my voice sharp, but it came out thin. Caleb looked at the floor. "When I realized what you were to me, I read everything I could. Not because I expected this, because I was afraid of being the wrong kind of alpha near you." The confession stole whatever anger I had left. I watched him stand on the other side of the kitchen, shoulders tense, hands open at his sides, his own scent held back so tightly it felt like he was sealing part of himself behind glass. "Does it hurt?" I asked. His eyes flicked to mine. "What? Holding yourself back?" For the first time all night, Caleb almost smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Not as much as hurting you would." The words settled over me more gently than the blanket he later found in the hall closet. I should have felt trapped with him. Instead, I felt terrifyingly safe, and that was the most dangerous part. My body calmed in small, reluctant steps, not because the crisis was gone, but because Caleb refused to let fear run the room. He talked me through each breath. For counts in, for counts out. He kept his voice low, never pushing, never crowding. When thunder shook the windows again and I flinched, he asked before moving closer, "May I sit there?" He nodded toward the chair at the other end of the table, still several feet away. I gave the smallest nod. He sat, careful as moonlight, and rested his hands flat on the wood where I could see them. "Ryan saved me once," he said after a long silence. "That is the part you do not know." I looked up, the towel cold beneath my fingers. Caleb stared toward the dark window, where our reflections floated over the storm like ghosts. After my father died, I was 19 and angry at the world. Ryan was the first person who did not try to fix me or fear me. He just stayed. He gave me a family when mine felt gone. His throat moved. So when I realized I loved his little brother, I thought the only decent thing left in me was silence. My eyes burned. "And what do you think now?" Caleb looked at me then, and the whole storm seemed to pause around his answer. "I think silence became its own kind of lie. The lie sat between us longer than any confession had. It was not loud. It did not shatter anything. It simply remained there on the kitchen table with the cooling towel, the half-empty glass of water, and the little battery fan humming like a tired insect against the storm. I wanted to be angry at Caleb, and part of me was. I was angry that he had known. Angry that he had stepped into our house for 2 years with that secret folded neatly behind his calm eyes. Angry that he had let me feel foolish and childish and alone in something that had never been mine to carry by myself. But beneath the anger was something softer and more frightening. Relief. The kind that made my bones feel weak. I had not imagined it. I had not spent years turning ordinary kindness into fantasy because I was lonely. Caleb had felt the same pull and had chosen distance not because I meant nothing, but because I meant too much. Another wave of warmth moved through me, and I pressed the towel to the back of my neck, breathing through it the way he had taught me. Caleb noticed, but he did not move until I looked at him. "May I get closer?" he asked. My answer took a moment because the question itself hurt. He was asking permission for something my heart had begged for since I was 18. I nodded once. Caleb rose from his chair and came around the table slowly, like a man approaching a frightened animal he would rather lose than scare. He stopped beside me, still not touching, close enough that his scent reached me in a careful thread of cedarwood and cold rain. It steadied something inside me so quickly that tears blurred the lantern light. "I hate that this helps," I whispered. "I do not," he said. "I hate that you needed help because of a storm and bad timing. But I will never hate being safe for you." My eyes closed before I could stop them. The words were too gentle. Too much. He crouched beside the chair so he would not tower over me, keeping his hands visible on his knees. "Ethan, listen to me. Nothing has to happen tonight. Nothing has to be decided while you are overwhelmed. I can sit across the room. I can stay on the porch if that feels better. I can call the county line again until a signal goes through. You are in control here." I opened my eyes and looked at him, really looked at him, at the rain in his hair, the strain around his mouth, the restraint that made his shoulders rigid. This was not the alpha from whispered stories who claimed first and thought later. This was Caleb, who had driven Ryan home after college parties, fixed my mother's porch light without being asked, and once stood in the grocery store comparing soup labels because Dad had been told to watch his sodium. This was the man who could have used instinct as an excuse, but chose honor even when it cost him. I do not want you on the porch, I said. His breath caught, so slightly I almost missed it. Where do you want me? Thunder rolled low over the lake, softer now, farther away. I looked at the empty chair beside mine, the one close enough for his presence to quiet the panic, but far enough for both of us to keep breathing. There, I said. Caleb sat beside me, careful not to brush my arm. For several minutes, we watched rain run down the black window glass. Our reflections hovered side by side, almost touching, not touching at all. My body eased by inches. The room stopped spinning. The ache behind my eyes dulled. Caleb did nothing dramatic. He only stayed. Maybe that was why it undid me. When Ryan finds out, I said, he will think we betrayed him. Caleb's jaw tightened. Maybe. That is all you can say? No, he looked at me then, and his gray eyes held steady through every fear I had left. I can say I will not hide behind him anymore. I can say I should have trusted you with the truth. And I can say that when morning comes, if you want me to walk away, I will. But I will not lie and call it easy. My throat burned. And if I do not want you to walk away? His hands curled once against his knees, then relaxed. Then we tell the truth carefully. Together. The word together moved through me like light under a closed door. I reached across the small space between our chairs, not for his hand, not fully, only enough that my fingertips rested on the table near his. Caleb looked down at them as if they were something precious and dangerous. He did not take more than I offered. He simply turned his hand palm up and let me decide. Outside, the storm kept the roads flooded and the bridge closed and the whole world away from us. Inside, my fingers touched his palm, and the faint silver mark beneath my sleeve began to warm. The warmth under my sleeve was so faint at first that I could have pretended it was only my pulse. I wanted to pretend. Pretending had carried me through years of family dinners, birthday candles, lake trips, and every ordinary moment when Caleb Hayes stood close enough to ruin me and far enough to keep his honor clean. But the mark did not care about honor. It answered him quietly, like a small hidden light beneath my skin, and when my fingertips settled in his open palm, Caleb went completely still. He did not close his hand around mine. He did not pull me closer. He only looked down at the place where I had chosen to touch him, and the restraint on his face nearly broke my heart. Does it hurt? He asked. No, I whispered. It feels like it knows you. His eyes lifted to mine, and for one breath the storm outside seemed less real than the silence between us. The rain had softened to a steady curtain against the glass, and somewhere in the distance, emergency sirens moved along the far side of the lake, muted by water and wind. The whole world was out there, flooded roads, fallen branches, broken power lines, my brother in an airport terminal trying to get a signal. But in the kitchen, there was only Caleb, the lantern glow, and the impossible tenderness of his hand waiting beneath mine. Ethan, he said, and my name sounded like both warning and prayer. We should slow down. A laugh caught in my throat, fragile and almost sad. We have been slowing down for years. His mouth tightened, because he knew I was right. I turned my wrist before fear could stop me and pushed the sleeve back just enough for him to see the pale silver crescent near my pulse. Caleb inhaled once, carefully, as if even surprise needed permission. He did not touch the mark. He stared at it with a reverence that made my eyes sting. A shelter bond, he said softly. Temporary. You sound relieved. I sound terrified. That honesty loosened something inside me. Of me. Of wanting to protect you so badly that I forget protection does not mean possession. The words settled between us like another candle being lit. I looked at him then, at the man who had loved me in silence because loyalty had chained him to the doorway of his own heart, and I finally asked the question that had been haunting every breath since the lights went out. If Ryan was not my brother, would you still walk away from me? Caleb closed his eyes. When he opened them, the answer was already there, painful and clear. No, my breath trembled. He turned his hand slowly beneath mine, giving me time to pull away, and when I did not, his fingers curled around mine with heartbreaking gentleness. If Ryan was not your brother, Caleb said, voice rough but steady, I would have chosen you years ago, not because of instinct, not because of a bond, because every time you walked into a room, the world made more sense. Tears slipped down my face before I could stop them. Caleb reached for the towel instead of my cheek, folded it with shaking hands, and offered it to me like a man still determined not to take what had not been given. That was when I leaned forward, not far, only enough to rest my forehead against his. He froze, then bowed his head as if something inside him had finally surrendered to mercy. We stayed that way while rain stitched silver lines down the windows, breathing the same quiet air, not crossing into anything unsafe, not needing to. His hand held mine on the table. My mark warmed beneath the edge of his thumb without him touching it directly. For the first time all night, my body stopped fighting the storm. I am scared, I admitted. Caleb's voice was barely more than a whisper. So am I. But I do not want this to disappear in the morning. His forehead pressed a little more firmly against mine. Then it will not. Outside, thunder faded into the hills. Inside, I believed him, and that belief felt more dangerous than the storm had ever been. By the time the storm finally weakened, neither of us had the strength left to pretend we were unchanged. Caleb helped me move from the kitchen to the living room only after I asked him to, his hand steady beneath my elbow, his body angled away, as if he could turn restraint into a language I would understand. The house was still dark, but the danger had softened. Rain whispered against the windows instead of striking them, and the lake beyond the backyard was hidden beneath a pale gray mist. I sat on the couch while Caleb found dry clothes from the laundry basket near the stairs, then paused with one of his own spare shirts in his hands. He kept one in Ryan's closet, folded beside old fishing jackets and college sweatshirts. Because he had stayed over at our house so many times, he had become part of the furniture of our lives. "This is clean," he said quietly. "It might be more comfortable than your damp hoodie." I took it without speaking because my throat had filled with too many things. The shirt swallowed my frame. Soft cotton carrying the clean cedarwood scent I had once tried to forget and now knew I never could. Caleb turned his back while I changed behind the hallway door. When I came out, he was standing near the window, one hand braced against the frame, staring at the road as if morning might arrive with judgment in its headlights. "You should sleep," he said. "You have been fighting your own body for hours. Will you leave?" I asked. He looked at me then, and the answer did not need words. He took the armchair across from the couch, close enough for me to see him, far enough for both of us to keep every promise we had made in the dark. I fell asleep to the sound of rain and the steady rhythm of his breathing. When I woke, dawn had turned the living room silver. For a few confused seconds, I was back inside the fear of it, touching Caleb's sleeve on my shoulder, hiding the faint crescent mark beneath the cuff as he stepped in from the porch with rain in his hair and guilt in his eyes. "The county reopened the bridge," he said softly. "Ryan has been trying to call." My stomach dropped. As if summoned by his name, headlights swept across the front windows. Tires crunched over wet gravel. Caleb went still, and I sat up too fast, clutching the blanket to my chest like it could hide every truth in the room. The front door opened before either of us spoke. Ryan stood there with his suitcase in one hand, his hair messy from travel, his face unreadable as his eyes moved from Caleb in yesterday's clothes to me wrapped in Caleb's shirt. Silence filled the doorway. I waited for anger. I waited for disappointment. I waited for the brother I loved to look at me like I had broken something sacred. Instead, Ryan set his suitcase down and released a long, tired breath. "I was wondering how long you two were going to keep lying to me." My heart stopped. Caleb stepped forward, not in front of me exactly, but near enough to make it clear he would not let me face the moment alone. "Ryan," he said, voice rough. "I should have told you." "Yes," Ryan answered. "You should have." He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a sealed envelope, softened at the edges like it had been carried for a long time. He placed it on the coffee table between us. My name was written across the front in my mother's careful handwriting. Beneath it was Caleb's. "2 years ago," Ryan said quietly, "Mom found out after your birthday party. She had the clinic run a private compatibility screen because she was worried about why Ethan got sick every time you left too quickly." My hands went cold. Caleb stared at the envelope as if it might disappear. Ryan's voice lowered. The results came back the next week. 98% scent compatibility. A natural shelter response. "Mom wanted to tell you both." I told her not yet. I looked up, stunned. "You knew?" Pain moved across my brother's face, gentle and human. "I knew Caleb would run from it if he thought I felt betrayed. I knew you would hide it if you thought it would hurt me. So I waited for one of you to trust me enough to tell the truth." The faint mark on my wrist warmed beneath Caleb's sleeve. Outside, sunlight broke through the last line of storm clouds, bright and fragile over the flooded road. Ryan looked at Caleb, then at me, and his voice softened. So tell me now, is this fear, or is this real? Caleb reached for my hand, stopped, and let me choose. This time, I did not hide. I placed my hand in his, lifted my wrist into the morning light, and answered for both of us. It is real.